I stood at my kitchen window, watching concrete trucks pour the foundation of what would become a $3 million mansion on my own land. And I smiled because my daughter-in-law Rebecca had no idea that every brick she laid was sealing her own fate. For 18 months, I watched her build her dream home on property she thought she'd stolen from me through forged documents and lies, never suspecting that this 72-year-old man she'd dismissed as a senile fool had been 3 steps ahead of her the entire time. She called me yesterday, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she'd perfected over the years, asking when I'd be moving out of her property. I told her I'd be out by the end of the week. What I didn't tell her was that when she arrived with her moving trucks and her victory smile, she'd be walking into the shock of her miserable life. My lawyer says I should feel guilty about what I'm about to do, but after the way she manipulated my own son against me, turned him into a puppet who believed every lie she fed him about his confused old father, and after discovering the real reason she wanted this land so desperately, guilt is the last thing I feel. Rebecca thought she was building her castle. She had no idea she was actually building her own prison. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button because this story takes turns you won't believe, and I've got plenty more where this came from. It all started 2 years ago when my son Daniel brought Rebecca to Sunday dinner and announced they were engaged. I should have seen the warning signs right then. The way she smiled at me was too bright, too practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She complimented everything, my house, my cooking, even my old flannel shirt, but her eyes never stopped calculating, measuring, appraising everything around her. My wife Margaret had passed away 3 years earlier, and this 20-acre property in the hills outside Nashville had been our life's work. We'd bought it for nothing back in 1978, cleared the land ourselves, built our modest home with our own hands. Daniel grew up here, learned to ride his bike on these dirt roads, built tree forts in the woods out back. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Rebecca was different from any woman Daniel had dated before. She worked in real estate development, always dressed in expensive clothes, always on her phone making deals. Daniel was a simple man, a high school history teacher who loved books and quiet evenings. I couldn't understand what she saw in him, and looking back now, I know exactly what she saw. Me, or rather, what I owned. At that first dinner, she asked me about the property. "Daniel says you have 20 acres here. That must be worth quite a bit now with all the development happening in this area." Her tone was casual, but I caught the hunger underneath. I told her Margaret and I never thought about selling, that this land would be Daniel's someday. She smiled and said, "Of course, family legacy is so important." The wedding was small, expensive, and paid for entirely by Rebecca's parents. I noticed she didn't invite many people from her side, just her parents and a couple of friends. When I tried to talk to her mother at the reception, the woman excused herself after 2 minutes. Her father avoided me completely. That should have been another red flag. 3 months after the wedding, Rebecca started her campaign. She and Daniel came over for dinner, and she brought architectural magazines. "Dad," she said. She'd started calling me Dad immediately after the wedding. Daniel and I were thinking about building a house. Something modern, something with good investment potential. She spread the magazines across my kitchen table, showing me glass-walled mansions and minimalist estates. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I thought we were just looking at regular houses in town." She touched his hand and gave him that practiced smile. "Honey, we talked about this. Building is a much better investment than buying." Then she turned to me. "Dad, we were wondering if you'd consider selling us a piece of this property. Just 2 or 3 acres in the back corner. You'd never even know we were here." I told them I'd think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole conversation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Daniel was my only child. If he wanted to build on the property, why wouldn't I help him? But it was Rebecca who was pushing it, not Daniel. The next week, she came by alone. Daniel was at work, she said, but she wanted to talk to me, father to daughter. She sat at my kitchen table, in the same chair Margaret used to sit in, and laid out her plan. She wanted to build a small house on the back 5 acres. She'd already talked to architects and contractors. She even had preliminary drawings. The thing is, Dad, we'd need you to transfer the land to us before we can get the construction loans approved. Just a simple property transfer, and then we can get started. She pushed a folder across the table. I had my lawyer draw up the paperwork. It's very straightforward. I told her I needed to review it with my own lawyer. Her smile tightened just a fraction. Of course, but these interest rates won't last forever. The sooner we move, the better the financial situation will be for everyone. She left the folder on my table like it was already a done deal. That night, I called my lawyer, Tom Henderson. We'd been friends for 40 years. Went to the same church. Played poker every Thursday. I took him the folder. Tom read through it for 10 minutes, then looked at me over his reading glasses. Frank, this isn't a simple land transfer. According to this, you'd be signing over the entire 20 acres to them, not just 5. My blood went cold. That can't be right. She said just 5 acres in the back. Tom showed me the legal description. It was the entire property, house included. Frank, I don't know what kind of game your daughter-in-law is playing, but this document would make you homeless while giving her everything. I drove to Daniel's apartment that night. He was alone, grading papers at his dining table. When I showed him the documents and explained what Tom had found, his face went pale. Dad, that can't be right. Rebecca said it was just for the back corner. He called her immediately. I could hear her voice through the phone, sweet and reasonable. Honey, that's just the standard template. Obviously, we'd adjust it before signing. But I'd seen Tom's face. That wasn't a template. That was a deliberate attempt to steal my entire property. Daniel wanted to believe her. I could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at me like I was the one causing problems. Dad, you're probably just misunderstanding the legal language. Rebecca works in real estate. She knows what she's doing. Over the next few months, Rebecca's true nature started showing in small ways. She'd make comments about how I was getting forgetful when I'd remember conversations perfectly. She'd tell Daniel I'd said things I never said. She'd show up at my house unannounced, always with some excuse, always looking around like she was already mentally redecorating. One Sunday, I overheard her on the phone in my bathroom. No, he's not going to just give it to us. We're going to have to be smarter about this. When she came out and saw my face, she laughed it off. Oh, Dad, that was about a client. You know how difficult some people can be in real estate? I started keeping notes. Every conversation, every visit, every strange comment. Tom told me I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca was planning something. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I came home from my weekly grocery trip to find Rebecca's car in my driveway. She was in my house, in my office, going through my desk drawers. When I confronted her, she didn't even look embarrassed. Dad, I was just looking for that old property survey you mentioned. Daniel said you wouldn't mind. I knew for a fact I'd never mentioned any property survey to Daniel. I told her to leave. She smiled that cold smile and said, Of course. I found what I needed anyway. After she left, I checked my filing cabinet. My original property deed was missing. I called Tom immediately. He told me to file a police report, but I hesitated. Rebecca was married to my son. Calling the cops on her would destroy my relationship with Daniel forever. Instead, Tom suggested we get a certified copy of the deed from the county recorder's office and keep it in his office safe. We did that the next day. But I also did something else. I installed security cameras around my property, hidden in trees and under eaves. Tom thought I was going overboard, but I wanted evidence of whatever Rebecca was planning. 2 weeks later, the cameras caught her. She came to my property at 2 in the morning with a man I'd never seen before. They spent an hour walking the perimeter, taking measurements, the man making notes on a clipboard. The video was grainy, but clear enough to see their faces. The next morning, Daniel called me. "Dad, Rebecca and I have decided to build on our own. We're buying land across town. I just wanted you to know so you don't worry about the property anymore." His voice was stiff, rehearsed. I knew Rebecca was there, probably listening to every word. I told him that was great news, that I was happy for them. After I hung up, I watched the security footage again. Rebecca wasn't looking for her own land. She was surveying mine. 3 days later, I got a certified letter. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, claiming that I'd signed a quitclaim deed transferring my property to Rebecca Mitchell, her maiden name, not even using Daniel's last name. Attached was a photocopy of a document with what looked like my signature. My hands shook as I called Tom. They forged it. Tom, they forged my signature and filed a fake deed. Tom told me to come to his office immediately and not to touch anything or talk to anyone. At Tom's office, we compared the forged deed to my real signature. It was close, but not perfect. The F in Frank had a different loop, and the R was too angular. Tom said we had a strong case for fraud, but we needed to be strategic. "Frank, if Rebecca filed this deed, she's planning something big. We need to find out what before we make our move." I went home and reviewed all my security footage from the past months. That's when I found it. Footage from 6 weeks earlier showing Rebecca and the same man entering my property at night. But this time, they weren't just surveying. They were marking trees with orange spray paint, laying stakes in the ground, planning a construction site. Rebecca was going to build on my land whether I gave her permission or not. She'd created a fake deed, filed it with the county, and was moving forward like the property was already hers. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Tom and I developed a plan. Instead of immediately challenging the fake deed and alerting Rebecca that we knew about her fraud, we'd let her proceed. We'd document everything, every contractor she hired, every permit she filed, every dollar she spent. Then, when the house was complete, we'd reveal the truth and take back not just the land, but everything she'd built on it. "Frank," Tom warned me, "this is risky. You'll have to watch her build on your property for months, maybe over a year. Can you handle that?" I thought about my wife Margaret, about the life we'd built on this land, about my son who'd been turned against me by this woman's manipulation. "I can handle it," I told him. "And when this is over, Rebecca is going to learn an expensive lesson about stealing from old men." The construction started 3 weeks later. I watched from my kitchen window as surveyors arrived, as excavators dug the foundation, as concrete trucks poured the basement. Every day, I documented everything with photos and videos. Every night, I reviewed contracts and permits that Tom obtained through legal channels. Rebecca was building a $3 million mansion, 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool, a 4-car garage. She'd taken out massive construction loans using the forged deed as collateral. She'd hired the most expensive contractors in Nashville. She was building her dream home on my land, and she had no idea that every brick was evidence in the fraud case we were building against her. Daniel came by one evening, awkward and uncomfortable. "Dad, I know you must be confused by what's happening. Rebecca explained that you signed the property over to us last year, but then forgot about it because of your memory issues." I let him believe I was confused. I played the part of the forgetful old man. It killed me to see my son look at me with pity instead of respect, but I needed Rebecca to think her plan was working. The construction took 18 months. I watched that house rise from the ground, watched the walls go up, watched the roof tiles get placed one by one. I watched Rebecca visit the site almost daily, always with her architect or designer, always making changes, always spending more money. I watched my son come by less and less, watched him avoid my eyes when he did visit, watched Rebecca's poison work deeper into my family. But I also watched Tom build our case. Every forged document, every fraudulent filing, every contractor's lien, every loan application, all of it based on a property deed that didn't exist. Rebecca had created a house of cards, and I was about to blow it down. Last week, the final inspection passed. The mansion was complete. Rebecca called me, her voice sweeter than honey. "Dad, the house is finished. Daniel and I will be moving in next weekend. We wanted to give you time to pack up and find a nice retirement home. We've been looking at some lovely assisted living facilities for you." I told her I'd be out by Friday. She said that was perfect, that she'd hired movers for Saturday morning. Then she said something that made my blood boil. "Dad, I want you to know that this was all for the best. You're getting older, and you really can't manage this property anymore. Daniel and I will take good care of it. It's what Margaret would have wanted." She had the audacity to invoke my dead wife's name while stealing everything we'd built together. That's when I knew Rebecca wasn't just greedy. She was evil. Friday morning arrived, and I packed exactly one suitcase like I'd told Rebecca I would. I loaded it into my truck along with a few boxes of Margaret's photos and my important papers, the real ones, not the forgeries Rebecca had created. Tom had arranged for me to stay at his lake house an hour away, far enough that Rebecca would think I'd actually left for good. But I wasn't really leaving. I'd set up remote access to all my security cameras, and I'd be watching every single moment of what happened next. I drove away at noon, making sure to wave at the construction foreman who'd been working on Rebecca's mansion for the past year and a half. He waved back, probably thinking the crazy old man was finally being moved to a nursing home like Rebecca had told everyone. What he didn't know was that I'd been paying him and his crew bonuses out of my own pocket to document every single detail of the construction. Invoices, change orders, material receipts, everything. They thought I was just a generous old man who liked to chat. They had no idea I was building a legal case. Saturday morning, I watched on my phone as Rebecca's moving trucks arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. She pulled up in her white Mercedes SUV, Daniel in the passenger seat looking uncomfortable. I zoomed in on their faces through the camera hidden in the oak tree by the driveway. Rebecca was radiant, practically glowing with triumph. Daniel looked sick. Even from a distance, through a camera lens, I could see my son knew something was wrong, but he was too deep under Rebecca's control to act on it. The movers started unloading furniture, expensive pieces I'd never seen before, designer couches and chairs that probably cost more than my entire house. Rebecca directed them like a general commanding troops, pointing to rooms, barking orders, clearly in her element. She was wearing white linen pants and a silk blouse, completely impractical for moving day. But she wasn't there to work. She was there to claim her prize. Then I watched her do something that made my hands clench around my phone. She walked to my house, the modest 3-bedroom ranch that Margaret and I had built with our own hands, and she tried the door. It was locked. She pulled out a key, my spare key that I'd given Daniel years ago for emergencies, and she let herself in. Daniel followed behind her, but he stopped at the threshold, like some part of him knew they were trespassing. Rebecca walked through my home like she owned it. I watched through the interior cameras I'd installed as she opened closets, checked cabinets, ran her finger along the kitchen counter Margaret had chosen, the one we'd saved for 2 years to afford. Then she said something to Daniel, and even though the cameras didn't have audio, I could read her lips. "This old junk will sell for practically nothing." She was already planning to liquidate my entire life. That's when Daniel finally spoke up. I could see him shaking his head, gesturing toward the door, clearly uncomfortable with being in my house. Rebecca put her hand on his cheek, that same manipulative gesture I'd seen her use 100 times, and I watched my son's resistance crumble. She led him back outside, probably with some excuse about respecting my privacy. But the damage was done. She'd already marked everything Margaret and I had built as garbage to be thrown away. Tom called me at 10 that morning. "Frank, are you watching?" His voice was tight with controlled anger. He'd been monitoring the cameras, too. "I'm watching," I told him. "How much longer do we wait?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Let her get completely moved in. Let her spend the weekend arranging furniture, hanging pictures, making it her home. The more invested she is, the harder the fall. I know what you're thinking. Why did I let it go on so long? Why didn't I stop her right then?" Trust me, what happened next made every minute of waiting worth it. I watched all weekend as Rebecca transformed that mansion into her palace. She hung crystal chandeliers in the foyer, placed modern art on the walls, set up a home theater in the basement. Daniel helped with the physical labor, hanging curtains, assembling furniture, but he moved like a robot, mechanical and distant. Several times, I saw him walk to the windows that overlooked my little house, and I wondered what he was thinking. Did he feel guilty? Did some part of him remember the father who'd raised him with love and sacrifice? Sunday evening, Rebecca threw a party. I watched luxury cars pull up one after another. Her real estate colleagues, her wealthy friends, people who'd never given a damn about Daniel or his humble teacher's salary. They walked through that mansion taking photos, drinking champagne, congratulating Rebecca on her incredible new home. Not one person asked about me. Not one person wondered where the property's actual owner had gone. To them, I simply didn't exist. Daniel stood in the corner of the living room nursing a beer, looking more uncomfortable by the minute. A woman in a red dress approached him. I recognized her as Karen Walsh, one of Rebecca's business partners, and I watched them talk. Daniel shook his head several times, and Karen laughed, touching his arm in that over-familiar way some women do. Then Rebecca appeared beside them, her smile tight and possessive. She looped her arm through Daniel's and pulled him away, and I saw my son allow himself to be led like a child. That night, after all the guests had left, I watched Rebecca and Daniel in their new master bedroom through the camera hidden in the smoke detector. The security system installer had been reluctant to put cameras inside the house, but I'd insisted. I needed to know what Rebecca was really planning. They were getting ready for bed, and Rebecca was talking, gesturing with her hands, clearly excited. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his head down, not responding. Then Rebecca knelt in front of him, took his hands in hers, and I watched her mouth move. "Your father is better off this way. He couldn't handle this property anymore. We're helping him." It was the same lie she'd been feeding him for 2 years, and I watched Daniel nod slowly, wanting to believe her, because the alternative, that his wife had destroyed his relationship with his father through deliberate manipulation and fraud, was too painful to accept. Monday morning, Tom called me at dawn. "Frank, I have news. Rebecca applied for a home equity line of credit on the property over the weekend. She's trying to borrow $2 million against a house that sits on land she doesn't actually own." I felt my chest tighten. "How is that even possible?" "The banks must check ownership." Tom's voice was grim. "They do, but she filed the fraudulent deed 18 months ago. In the county records, it looks legitimate unless someone specifically challenges it. The bank has no reason to doubt it." This was worse than I'd thought. Rebecca wasn't just stealing my property. She was leveraging it for additional money. "Tom, what happens when the bank finds out the deed is fake?" I asked. "They'll come after her for fraud," Tom said. "But Frank, if we wait too long, if she actually gets that loan and spends the money, this gets a lot more complicated. We need to act soon." I thought about Margaret, about the promise I'd made her before she died to protect our land and take care of our son. "1 more week," I told Tom. "I want to see what else she's planning, and I want Daniel to see it too." Tom sighed. "Frank, your son might not thank you for this." I looked at my phone screen, at the live feed showing Daniel leaving for work, shoulders slumped, looking 10 years older than he should. He doesn't have to thank me. He just has to wake up. That week, I discovered something that changed everything. While reviewing the security footage from the construction period, I found video from 6 months earlier showing Rebecca meeting with a man at the construction site late at night. They were arguing. I could see the aggressive body language, the pointing fingers. I took screenshots and sent them to Tom. "Who is this guy? He's been showing up in the footage for months." Tom ran a background check. 2 days later, he called me back, and his voice was shaking. "Frank, that's Marcus DeLuca. He's a developer from Chicago with a criminal record. Fraud, embezzlement, served 3 years in federal prison. And get this, he and Rebecca worked together at a real estate firm in Chicago 7 years ago, right before she moved to Nashville, and met Daniel." The pieces started falling into place. Rebecca hadn't randomly fallen in love with my son. She'd researched him, found out about his family's property, and targeted him deliberately. Daniel wasn't her husband. He was her access point. "There's more," Tom continued. "DeLuca has been buying up property all around your land. He owns the 6 parcels that border yours on 3 sides. If he could get your 20 acres, he'd have enough contiguous land to develop a major residential subdivision. We're talking $50 million in potential profit." I felt sick. This was never about a house. This was about a massive real estate scam, and my son was nothing more than a pawn. "Tom, we need to tell Daniel." But Tom stopped me. "Not yet. If you tell Daniel now, he might warn Rebecca, and she'll destroy evidence. We need to catch them both together. We need proof that she's working with DeLuca, and we need it on record." So I waited and watched. Over the next few days, I saw DeLuca visit the mansion 3 more times, always when Daniel was at work. The last visit, Rebecca let him into the house, and they spent 2 hours inside. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see them spreading maps and documents across the dining room table. My dining room table, the one that now sat in their stolen house. Friday afternoon, something happened that broke my heart. Daniel came home early from school and found DeLuca's car in the driveway. I watched through the cameras as my son walked into his house and found Rebecca and DeLuca in the home office, huddled over a laptop. Daniel asked who DeLuca was. I could see the question in his body language, the way he stood in the doorway, tense and suspicious. Rebecca's face transformed into that sweet smile she'd perfected. She introduced DeLuca as her business consultant, helping with some investment opportunities. Daniel didn't buy it. I could see doubt written all over his face. But then DeLuca shook his hand, made some joke that made Daniel's shoulders relax slightly, and I watched my son let himself be manipulated once again. He wanted to trust his wife. He needed to trust her, because if he couldn't, then what did that say about his judgment, his marriage, his entire life? That evening, I called Tom. "I can't watch this anymore. My son deserves to know the truth." Tom agreed. Monday morning, we filed the motion to void the fraudulent deed. "We'll request an emergency hearing, and I'll ask for a temporary restraining order preventing Rebecca from taking out any loans or selling the property. We'll also notify the district attorney about the fraud. This is going to get ugly, Frank. If you're still watching, drop a like on this video. The next part is where everything explodes, and you won't believe what Rebecca did when she realized she was caught. The weekend was torture. I watched Rebecca and Daniel through the cameras, living in that mansion, eating meals in that kitchen, sleeping in that master bedroom, all on my property, all based on lies. Saturday afternoon, Rebecca's parents came to visit. I'd only met them once at the wedding, and they'd been cold and distant. Now I watched them walk through the mansion, admiring every detail, clearly impressed by their daughter's success. Daniel grilled steaks on the patio, while Rebecca gave her parents the full tour. They spent 20 minutes in the master suite, Rebecca showing off the walk-in closet and the marble bathroom. Her mother hugged her, clearly proud. Her father shook Daniel's hand, probably congratulating him on being a good provider, not knowing that his daughter was a criminal and his son-in-law was a victim. Sunday morning, I watched Daniel leave early for a teacher's conference. The moment his truck disappeared down the driveway, DeLuca's car pulled up. He and Rebecca spent 3 hours in the office, and when he finally left, Rebecca walked him to his car, and they stood talking for another 30 minutes. Whatever they were planning, it was big, and it was happening soon. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Daniel. His voice was quiet, strained. "Dad, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere?" My heart raced. "Of course, son. Where are you?" He gave me the address of a coffee shop in town. "Don't tell Rebecca. Please, Dad. Just don't tell her." I drove to the coffee shop, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I walked in, I found Daniel sitting in a back corner booth, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he hugged me, and I felt him trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." We sat down, and Daniel told me everything. How Rebecca had been pressuring him to convince me to sell the land. How she'd become angry and distant when I refused. How she'd started telling him I was showing signs of dementia, that I'd forgotten signing documents, that I needed to be in a care facility. I believed her, Dad. God help me. I believed her because I loved her, and I thought she loved me. Then he told me what had happened that morning. He'd forgotten his phone at home and had come back to get it. He'd walked in and heard Rebecca on the phone in the office, talking to someone, probably DeLuca. She said, "The old fool is finally gone. We can move forward with Phase 2 now. Once the subdivision is approved, Daniel will be so rich he won't even remember his pathetic father." Daniel's voice broke. "She called you pathetic, Dad. She called you a fool. And the way she said my name, like I was just another part of her plan." He put his head in his hands. "What have I done? How could I let her turn me against you?" I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. "Son, she's a professional. This is what she does. But we're going to fix this. And we're going to do it together." Daniel looked up at me, his eyes red. "How? She has the deed. She has the house. She has everything." I smiled for the first time in months. "No, she doesn't. She never did. I'll explain everything. But first, you need to understand something. We're going to take her down, but you need to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded. "What do I need to do?" I laid out the plan. Tomorrow morning, Tom would file the emergency motion. Rebecca would be served with papers showing that her deed was fraudulent, that the property belonged to me, and that she'd committed multiple felonies. "He's going to be arrested, Daniel. Are you prepared for that?" My son's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "After what she did to you, to us, to our family?" "Yes, Dad. I'm prepared." We spent the next hour going over every detail. Daniel would go home and act normal, not giving Rebecca any hint that he knew the truth. Tuesday morning, when the sheriffs arrived to serve the papers and execute the restraining order, Daniel would be at school, giving himself distance from the initial chaos. "There's something else," Daniel said as we were leaving. "Last week, Rebecca told me she was pregnant." My blood went cold. "Is she?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't think so. She's been saying it for weeks, but she refuses to go to the doctor or take a test where I can see the results. I think it's another manipulation, trying to tie me to her even more." The depth of Rebecca's deception was staggering. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tuesday morning, about what would happen when Rebecca realized her entire scheme had collapsed. Tom had warned me she might become dangerous, that cornered criminals often do desperate things. But I also thought about Daniel, about how close I'd come to losing my son forever, and how his courage to reach out might have saved both of us. Monday morning felt like the longest day of my life. I watched the cameras obsessively, monitoring Rebecca's every move. She spent the morning on the phone, probably with DeLuca or other co-conspirators. Around noon, a black SUV pulled up, and 3 men in suits got out. They met with Rebecca on the patio, spreading maps and documents on the outdoor table. This was it. They were finalizing their subdivision plans, probably assuming I was safely tucked away in some nursing home, no longer a threat. Daniel texted me around 3. I can't do this, Dad. I can't sit across from her at dinner tonight and pretend everything is fine. I called him immediately. Son, you don't have to. Tell her you're staying late at school for parent-teacher conferences. Sleep at a hotel tonight. This is almost over. Daniel agreed, relief evident in his voice. Tomorrow morning, when this starts, will you be there? I promised him I would be. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd planned, was about to happen. And Rebecca had absolutely no idea that her perfect crime was about to become her perfect nightmare. Tuesday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., though I'd barely slept. Tom had everything ready: the emergency motion, the fraud evidence, the security footage, 18 months of documentation proving that Rebecca had built a $3 million mansion on property she'd stolen through forgery. At 7:30, I drove back to my land for the first time since I'd moved out the previous week. I parked down the road where Rebecca couldn't see my truck, and I waited. At 8 a.m. sharp, 2 sheriff's cars pulled into the driveway. I watched through my phone as they approached the mansion's front door. Rebecca answered in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand, looking confused, but not yet alarmed. The lead sheriff handed her an envelope. I zoomed in on her face as she read the papers inside, and I watched her expression change from confusion to shock to pure terror in the span of 30 seconds. She started yelling. I could see her mouth moving rapidly, her free hand gesturing wildly. The coffee cup fell from her other hand and shattered on the marble floor. One of the sheriffs said something that made her go pale. She tried to close the door, but they'd already served the papers. The emergency restraining order was now in effect. She couldn't sell the property, couldn't take out loans against it, couldn't even legally remain in the house without my permission. I drove up the driveway then, slowly, deliberately. When Rebecca saw my truck, her face went from pale to red with rage. She ran out of the house barefoot, screaming at me, at the sheriffs, at anyone who would listen. This is my house. He's a senile old man who doesn't know what he's doing. He signed the deed over to me. I have proof. Tom pulled up right behind me in his BMW. He got out carrying a briefcase that held all our evidence, looking every bit the seasoned attorney he was. Mrs. Mitchell, he said calmly, using her maiden name deliberately, I'm Tom Henderson, Mr. Holloway's attorney. The proof you claim to have is a forgery. We have extensive documentation showing that you fabricated a quitclaim deed, filed it fraudulently with the county, and built this house on property you don't own. Rebecca's eyes darted between me, Tom, and the sheriffs. I could see her mind racing, calculating her next move. You can't prove anything, she said, but her voice wavered. That deed is registered with the county. It's legal and binding. Tom opened his briefcase and handed a folder to the lead sheriff. Actually, we can prove everything. We have video footage of Mrs. Mitchell stealing Mr. Holloway's original deed from his home office. We have forensic analysis showing her forgery. We have recorded conversations between her and her co-conspirator Marcus DeLuca, planning this entire scheme. At the mention of DeLuca's name, Rebecca's mask finally cracked completely. How do you... She stopped herself, but it was too late. She'd just confirmed she knew exactly who DeLuca was, despite telling Daniel he was just a business consultant. The sheriff looked at Tom with new interest. There's a co-conspirator? Tom nodded. Marcus DeLuca, Chicago developer with a federal fraud conviction. He and Mrs. Mitchell planned to steal Mr. Holloway's land as part of a larger real estate development scheme worth approximately $50 million. I stepped forward then, and Rebecca's eyes locked on mine. For 2 years, she'd looked at me with fake sweetness, or barely concealed contempt. Now she looked at me with pure hatred. You knew, she hissed. You knew the whole time, and you let me build this house. You let me spend millions. She cut herself off, realizing she was confessing to the very fraud Tom had just described. I knew from the moment you stole my deed, I said quietly. I knew when you filed the forgery. I knew when you broke ground on this foundation. And I let you continue because I wanted you to invest everything, your money, your time, your reputation, into a crime that would destroy you completely. My voice was calm, but inside I was shaking with anger. You manipulated my son. You turned him against me. You called my wife's memory into question. You tried to have me declared senile and incompetent, all for money. Rebecca lunged at me then, and I wasn't prepared for it. She got 3 steps before one of the sheriffs caught her arm. "You bastard!" she screamed. "Do you know how much I spent on this house? Do you know how much debt I took on? You're going to ruin me." Tom's voice cut through her hysteria, like ice. "You ruined yourself, Mrs. Mitchell, and you're also under arrest." The sheriff pulled out handcuffs. "Rebecca Mitchell, you're being charged with forgery, fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Rebecca's screaming drowned out the rest of the Miranda warning. She fought the cuffs, twisting and pulling, still trying to get to me. The second sheriff had to help restrain her. As they walked her to the patrol car, she turned back one last time. "Where's Daniel?" she shrieked. "Where's my husband? Daniel will fix this. He'll tell you I'm not lying." That's when Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. My son got out slowly, his face pale but resolute. Rebecca's expression changed from rage to desperate hope. "Daniel, baby, tell them your father is confused. Tell them about the deed he signed." Daniel walked past her without a word. He came straight to me and stood by my side, and I felt his hand grip my shoulder. Rebecca's hope died in her eyes. "Daniel," her voice was small now, broken. "Daniel, please, I did this for us, for our future. We were going to be rich. We were going to have everything." My son finally looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and cold. "You did this for yourself. You used me. You destroyed my relationship with my father. You lied about being pregnant, and you called my father pathetic." He paused. "I heard you, Rebecca. Sunday morning, I heard everything you said on the phone." The sheriffs put Rebecca in the patrol car while she sobbed and screamed. As they drove away, I could still hear her voice echoing across my property. The property Margaret and I had bought with our own money, cleared with our own hands, built our life on together. The property Rebecca had tried to steal, but that now remained exactly where it belonged, with me. You're probably wondering what happened to the house. Stay with me, because what I did next was something even I didn't see coming. Tom handled the legal proceedings with surgical precision. Within a week, the county voided Rebecca's fraudulent deed and restored the original property records, showing me as the rightful owner. The bank that had been processing her home equity loan application was notified, and they immediately filed their own fraud charges. Turned out, Rebecca had lied on the loan application about her income, her assets, and obviously her ownership of the property. That added several more federal charges to her growing list. Marcus DeLuca was harder to catch. He'd fled Nashville the day Rebecca was arrested, but the FBI tracked him to a hotel in Miami. He made the mistake of trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands using a fake passport. Federal agents arrested him at the gate. In his hotel room, they found documents detailing the entire subdivision plan. How he and Rebecca had planned to force me off my land, develop 50 luxury homes, and split $50 million in profit. Daniel moved back into his old apartment. He'd been living in that mansion for exactly 9 days. 9 days that must have felt like 9 years. The first week after Rebecca's arrest, he came to my house every day, apologizing over and over until I finally had to tell him to stop. "Son," I said, "she was good at what she did. She made a living manipulating people. You're not the first person she fooled, and you probably wouldn't have been the last." We sat on my porch one evening, drinking coffee like we used to before Rebecca entered our lives. "Dad, I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," Daniel said. The way she pushed so hard about the property. How she always had an excuse when I questioned her. That phone call she had me make to you where she coached me on what to say. He shook his head. I let her turn me into someone I don't recognize. I told him about Margaret, about how when his mother was dying, she'd made me promise two things: to take care of our land and to take care of our son, in that order. She knew that the land was your inheritance, your security. She knew that as long as I protected the land, I was protecting you, even if you didn't know it. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Mom knew I'd need protecting from myself. I squeezed his shoulder. She knew you had a good heart. And people with good hearts are exactly the ones that predators like Rebecca target. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Rebecca's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been confused about the property ownership, that it was a civil matter rather than criminal fraud. But Tom had too much evidence. The video of her stealing my deed, the forensic analysis of the forgery, the recorded conversations with DeLuca, 18 months of construction documentation. The prosecutor offered her a deal: plead guilty to the main charges and testify against DeLuca in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rebecca took the deal. At her plea hearing, I attended with Daniel and Tom. She looked different. No designer clothes, no expensive jewelry, just an orange jumpsuit and the defeated expression of someone whose entire life had collapsed. When the judge asked if she understood she was pleading guilty to fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, her voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. She'd also have to pay restitution. $3 million, the full cost of the house she'd built on my land. After the sentencing, Rebecca's lawyer approached Tom in the hallway. Mr. Holloway wants that house demolished, doesn't he? Tom glanced at me. We'd talked about this extensively over the past weeks. The obvious choice was to tear it down, to erase every trace of Rebecca's crime from my property. But as I'd stood on my land watching that mansion rise from the ground, as I'd documented every brick and beam and dollar spent, another idea had begun forming in my mind. No, I told the lawyer. I'm keeping it. Tom looked at me sharply. Frank, we discussed this. I smiled. I know what we discussed, but I've been thinking about what Margaret would want. She always said this land was meant to help people, to provide for family. Well, that's exactly what it's going to do. 2 weeks later, I met with a nonprofit organization called Haven House that provided transitional housing for women escaping domestic violence. The director, a woman named Patricia Chen, came to tour the property. When she saw the mansion, 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a commercial-grade kitchen, sitting on 20 acres with trails and gardens, her eyes went wide. Mr. Holloway, this is incredible, but we couldn't possibly afford— I held up my hand. You don't need to afford it. I'm donating it. The house, 5 acres around it, everything. Patricia's mouth opened and closed. You're giving us a $3 million property? I shook my head. I'm not giving you anything. I'm using something that was built with criminal intent and turning it into something that serves justice. This house was built by a woman who manipulated and used people. Now, it's going to house women who were manipulated and used. That feels right. Daniel helped me work out the details. We set up a trust that would maintain the property and cover operating expenses. The remaining 15 acres, including my original house, stayed in my name. But I granted Haven House a permanent easement to use the land for gardens, therapy spaces, and outdoor activities. Patricia said they could house 15 women and their children at any given time. 15 families getting a second chance at life. All because Rebecca's greed had backfired spectacularly. The grand opening happened 6 months after Rebecca's sentencing. Local news covered it. Mansion built through fraud becomes haven for abuse survivors. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Several of Rebecca's old real estate colleagues showed up, probably to see the house they'd partied in now transformed into something that represented everything Rebecca had never been. Generous, honest, compassionate. I gave a short speech at the opening. I talked about my wife, Margaret, about how she'd always believed that good could come from bad situations if you were willing to look for it. I talked about second chances, about redemption, about how the worst moments of our lives could become the foundation for something meaningful. I didn't mention Rebecca by name, but everyone there knew the story. When I finished, 15 women and their children stood on the porch of that mansion, their new temporary home, and applauded. Daniel stood next to me, and I saw tears running down his face. "Mom would have loved this," he whispered. "She really would have." Later that evening, we sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the property. In the distance, we could see lights in the mansion's windows, see children playing in the yard, hear laughter drifting across the land. It sounded so different from Rebecca's housewarming party, with its fake conversations and champagne glasses. This sounded like home. "Dad, I need to ask you something," Daniel said. "After everything that happened, after seeing how Rebecca manipulated me, seeing how I turned against you, are we okay? Can we get back what we had?" I thought about the past 2 years, about watching my son slip away under Rebecca's influence, about playing the role of the confused old man while my heart broke. But I also thought about that moment in the coffee shop when Daniel had called me, when he'd chosen truth over comfort, when he'd chosen his father over his wife. "Son, we're better than okay," I told him. "What we had before was good, but it was built on assumption. You assumed I'd always be there. I assumed you'd always see through deception. What we have now is built on something stronger. We've both seen the worst and chose each other anyway. That's not just a father-son relationship. That's trust that's been tested and proven." A few months later, I got a letter from Rebecca in prison. Tom advised me not to read it, said it would probably be full of manipulation and blame. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long, and it surprised me. It wasn't asking for forgiveness or making excuses. It was just honest. She wrote about growing up poor, about watching her parents struggle, about developing an obsession with money and success that eventually consumed her. She wrote about meeting Daniel and seeing him as an opportunity rather than a person. She wrote about how the worst part of prison wasn't the confinement. It was having to finally face what she'd become. The last paragraph stayed with me. "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that what you did with the house, turning my worst crime into something that helps people, that taught me more about integrity than anything else could have. In trying to take everything from you, all I did was reveal how little I actually understood about what matters. You won, Mr. Holloway, not because you outsmarted me, but because you were always playing a different game." I never responded to the letter, but I kept it. Not as a trophy or a reminder of Rebecca's crimes, but as a reminder that people are complicated, that even the worst among us can have moments of clarity, and that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about transformation. Marcus DeLuca went to trial and was convicted on 17 counts of fraud and conspiracy. He got 20 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, before serving at least 12. Turned out Rebecca wasn't his first victim. He'd been running real estate scams for 15 years, targeting vulnerable property owners across 3 states. Our case helped prosecutors connect him to 6 other crimes. Sometimes the small victories lead to bigger justice. Daniel started dating again about a year after the divorce was finalized. He was cautious now, slower to trust, but also wiser about what to look for in a partner. He brought a woman named Sarah to meet me, a librarian who'd grown up on a farm and knew the value of land and family. She shook my hand with calluses on her palms, looked me in the eye, and said, "Mr. Holloway, Daniel told me everything that happened. I just want you to know that I think what you did, waiting, documenting, turning that house into something good, that took more strength than most people have." I liked her immediately. They got married 2 years later in my backyard. right on the spot where Margaret and I had said our vows 45 years earlier. It was small, just family and close friends, but it was real. No expensive caterers or designer dresses, just people who genuinely loved each other, celebrating something authentic. During the ceremony, I looked over at the mansion in the distance, now full of women and children rebuilding their lives, and I thought about how differently things could have turned out. Patricia from Haven House became a regular visitor, keeping me updated on the residents and sometimes bringing women over to help with my garden or share meals. One afternoon, a young woman named Maria came with her 2 daughters. She'd escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but the clothes on her backs. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I don't know if anyone told you, but that house saved my life. Having a safe place to stay while I got back on my feet, while my girls could just be kids again." Her voice broke. "Thank you." I told her the same thing I'd told everyone who thanked me. Thank the woman who built it, in a way. Her greed created something she never intended, a place of genuine refuge. That's the beautiful irony of justice. Maria smiled through tears. "My abuela used to say that God uses even the devil's tools to build his kingdom. I never understood it until now." D2. On what would have been Margaret's 75th birthday, I walked to her grave in the small cemetery just outside town. I told her everything about Rebecca's arrest, about Daniel's recovery, about the mansion becoming a shelter, about Sarah and the wedding. "You were right, Maggie," I said, touching the headstone. "You said protecting the land meant protecting Daniel. You said good things could come from bad situations. You were right about all of it." The wind picked up, rustling the oak leaves above her grave, and I swear I felt her presence, not in a supernatural way, but in the way you feel someone's influence years after they're gone. Margaret had shaped me, shaped Daniel, shaped our values. Even in death, she'd guided us through Rebecca's betrayal. The land we'd built together had been the foundation that held us steady when everything else was shaking. I still live in the same modest house Margaret and I built in 1978. People have suggested I move into something newer, something easier for a man my age to maintain. But I can't imagine living anywhere else. Every board in this floor, every nail in these walls, Margaret and I put them there together. This house isn't just shelter. It's memory made solid, love made permanent. Sometimes I stand at my kitchen window, the same window where I watched Rebecca's mansion rise from the ground, and I look at that building now filled with hope instead of greed. I think about the 18 months I spent documenting her crime, letting her invest millions into stolen land, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. People have asked me if I ever felt guilty about letting her go so far before I stopped her. The answer is no, because if I'd stopped her earlier, she might have gotten away with a lighter sentence. She might have manipulated her way out of serious consequences. She might have found another victim, another piece of land, another son to turn against his father. By letting her complete the house, by documenting every dollar she spent and every lie she told, I ensured she'd face the full weight of justice. But more than that, I created something good from her evil. That mansion houses 15 families at a time, meaning over the years it's helped hundreds of women and children escape abuse. Rebecca wanted to build a monument to her own success. Instead, she built a monument to redemption, second chances, and the resilience of the human spirit. She just didn't know it at the time. Tom retired last year at 75, finally hanging up his lawyer's hat after 50 years of practice. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside. "Frank, in all my years practicing law, your case was the most satisfying. Not because we won. I've won plenty of cases, but because of what came after. You turned a crime into a miracle. That's not legal strategy. That's wisdom. Daniel and Sarah are talking about having children now. My son asks me about Margaret, about what she was like as a mother, what advice she'd give about raising kids. I tell him about her patience, her strength. her absolute belief that people could change if given the right circumstances. Your mom would have loved Sarah, I tell him, and she'd be so proud of the man you became, especially after everything you went through. Last month, Rebecca was released on parole after serving 4 years. She's required to stay in Tennessee for another 2 years of supervised release, has to work with a court-appointed financial counselor, and is still paying restitution at $200 per month, a payment plan that will take her the rest of her life to complete. I heard through Tom that she's working at a call center, living in a small apartment, and keeping her head down. Part of me wonders if she'll ever drive past the property, if she'll see the mansion she built now serving a purpose she never imagined. Part of me wonders if she understands yet that the real theft wasn't the land or the money. It was the years she could have spent building something genuine instead of something fraudulent. But mostly, I don't think about Rebecca at all anymore. She's just a chapter in a much longer story. I'm 74 now, and my health isn't what it used to be. The doctor says I have a few good years left if I take care of myself, maybe more if I'm lucky. I've made sure everything is in order. The land will go to Daniel when I'm gone, with permanent easements protecting Haven House's access and use. Margaret and I built something that will outlast us both. That was always the goal. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and watch the sun set over the property. I see children playing on the mansion's lawn, their laughter carrying across the acres. I see women tending the gardens we planted together, growing vegetables for their families. I see Daniel and Sarah driving up the road for Sunday dinner, carrying a pie Sarah baked and news about their week. This is what Margaret and I fought for. Not the land itself, but what the land represents. Security, family, legacy, and the chance to do good in a world that often seems designed to reward evil. Rebecca tried to take all of that, and in failing, she accidentally helped us create more of it. There's poetry in that, the kind of cosmic justice that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself. I think about that morning I stood at my kitchen window watching concrete trucks pour Rebecca's foundation, knowing I was going to let her build her entire mansion before I revealed her crime. People might think that was cruel, or that I should have stopped her immediately. But those 18 months weren't about revenge. They were about creating something permanent from something temporary, something good from something evil. Rebecca thought she was building a house. What she actually built was a testament to the fact that even the worst intentions can't destroy the good that some people are determined to create. She built with greed and lies, and somehow those materials transformed into shelter and hope. That's not magic. That's what happens when you refuse to let evil have the final word. That's my story. A daughter-in-law tried to steal everything my wife and I built across 45 years of marriage. She manipulated my son, forged my documents, and constructed a $3 million mansion on my land. And in the end, all she did was provide housing for people who actually needed it, while destroying herself in the process. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stopped her earlier? Or would you have let her finish what she started? Leave me a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more stories to share. Stories about justice, family, and what happens when you refuse to give up on what's right. Thank you for listening to this old man ramble. Until next time.